Siyo God, welcome to Cherokee Stories. I'm your host, Phil Bange. If you'd like to host a show or would like to be interviewed and tell us your story, your family history, email us at cherokeestories@hotmail.com. Welcome to our show today. I'd like to tell some stories about the little people. Now, I've been around some friends of mine from out around Seattle area, Northwest area, and once in a while we talk about little people. You hear a story about somebody feeding them in their yard, or one friend of mine was from Oklahoma, and he told a story about being out hunting. Actually, this story was told to me over 20 years ago, but he's from Oklahoma, but I think he was in Montana with his wife. His wife was Crow, and they were out hunting, and they got a deer, but when they trailed it and found it, and I may be getting the story a little wrong, it's been 20 years, but I think they shot it and then had trouble finding it, and when they did, they saw a little person attending to the deer. And so they took their deer, but when he reached in to clean it, it burnt his hand. That's what I remember about this story. And so they told some of the community, and the community came and prayed, and he was told that he and his cousin-in-law, maybe it was, they needed to return the deer to where they got it and leave it there. And then some other times when I was just out hunting with some friends from a local tribe, and they would tell me a story here and there about different beings out in the woods. And then, of course, you know, Sasquatch comes up. And then I've had one picture on my trail cam came up one time, and it looked like a hairy little, like a little Sasquatch, only a foot tall, and the face was different looking. So these. Also, you can another source is that's pretty contemporary is Sasquatch Chronicles. They have a couple episodes where witnesses talk about seeing little people. One of them's even a parent whose son keeps saying these little people keep talking to him and bugging him, harassing him. So the father finally, gives him the time of day and starts listening. And as he's listening to his son's story, he sees one outside looking at them. So he catches a glimpse of one, and he later investigates a smell in his barn, and then in another building on his property. And the smell, it was coming from under a rock. He removes the rock, and there's a tunnel going down into the earth. And there's a smell coming up out of there, and it really stinks when he removes the rock. And then he goes in the other building, same thing. So he asks a neighbor about it, and the neighbor calls him. He says, don't you know about the dwarves? And so the guy telling the story said he didn't. He says, I don't know about the dwarves, and then he just gave up on that place and sold it. He didn't like it. He thought they were like demons. So it disturbed him. He didn't want to have anything to do with that. And then you hear these legends or stories outside of more of the legendary or mythical stories of the dwarves that were in Atlantis, or the giants and the dwarves. And you hear tales that they still exist, Here and there you'll hear tales that these things are still around us. And nobody knows for sure. It's just kind of out there as mythical. So I just wanted to give that introduction before getting into some of these stories. As I read the stories, I'm not adding in any sound effects, or at least I don't plan to. I don't know. There's some singing, dancing, music, and I don't know. I don't want to lead anybody on to what that sounds like without somebody witnessing this and saying this is what it sounded like. This is how they sing, And there's even some songs in these stories, and it's in Cherokee. So I'm not gonna lead anybody on that I know how to pronounce this or know how the song goes. So I apologize. If I knew where to find recordings of this, I'd love to get my hands on it and listen. It'd be fascinating. But I don't want to lead anybody on that perhaps I know something that I don't, because I don't. And these are very short stories from Friends of Thunder, Folk Tales of the Oklahoma Cherokees by Jack F. Kilpatrick and Anna G. Kilpatrick. The Little People. The Leprechauns of Oklahoma. Since the authors consider this book to be essentially a collection of source materials, it would seemingly suffice merely to call attention to the fact that the Cherokee subsumes several classes of little people, each of which possess distinctive attributes. This would also seem to be the place to point out that the white people who have some familiarity with Cherokee culture have a distressing tendency to confound the anthropoid little people with the spirit animals, but are nevertheless in possession of a sizable body of tales that, although second-hand, are well worth the collecting and the preserving. A small cloud of witnesses. We have attracted from our tapes a sheaf of anecdotes relating to encounters with the little people, either by persons known to the narrator or, in one case, by the narrator herself. It almost goes without saying that each of these little tales are related to us without the slightest trace of incredulity upon the part of the speaker. To the average Cherokee with some degree of traditional upbringing, the existence of the little people is an indisputable fact, and if he has himself been denied contact with them, he is almost certain to be acquainted with someone who has enjoyed the privilege. The Oklahoma Cherokees do not appear to believe that anything untoward is likely to accrue from seeing or even conversing with the little people, but although they are beings, there is a danger of becoming fascinated by them and following them off to unpredictable adventures. The Little People of Standing Rock. I know of things I heard about that were in the Cherokee country a long time ago. Long ago. The Salines, for instance, over there where the dam is, where the Great Lake Tenkiller is located, there used to be springs that they called salt springs. These springs were beyond what they used to call Old Cookson Hills. And I'll stop here for a second. I recorded my first cousin, Aunt Jen, Virginia Seabolt. Seabolt is her maiden name, but she was talking about some salt springs where they took her father, or some healing waters. And so I always, when I see stories like this, I always wonder Where's this at? Or it'd be interesting to go there. And then I wonder, is that related to the story my aunt was telling me? And actually, she's my first cousin, but I call her Aunt Jen because everybody does. So I'll continue on. There were some people who worked there. There were two men who were neighbors who worked there. The name of one was Ig, and the name of the other was Ogon. They went to work there, and when they finished work, they started home. The road was quite near Nia Digadoga. There was a place where Adeo used to live, and that's where one had to go downhill to the old road, and that's where they were walking when night fell. They lost their way. They both were hunting the road, and in hunting the road they lost each other, and neither one knew which way to go. Ig reached the bank of a creek. As he looked down into the water, away down into deep water, he saw some people. There was a house down there in the deep water. He saw people down there in the house. When he moved away from the bank, he went to a rocky area. There was a door there, and he entered it. When he went in, he discovered that he was in the same room into which he had looked. When he went into that room, he found many people in there. They were little people, and they were dancing. There were old folk in there, too, but they were also small. Ig and his host conversed a little bit. When the little people offered him food, they gave him raccoon meat to eat. When he finished eating the raccoon, they cleared off the scraps and put them in a barrel which was placed near the fireplace. Then after a while, when they took the lid off the barrel, a live raccoon emerged. Ig thought he had eaten that raccoon. They opened the door for the raccoon and it walked through it. All night the little people danced, but this man just sat near a very old man who was sitting upon the barrel and watched them. The old man who was sitting upon the barrel was toying with dried beeswax, poking it with his cane. That's the way it was until morning, at which time he left. He went out the door, and after he had walked a short distance, he looked back, but he could not see the door. It had disappeared. He went up the hill just a little way and found his friend Ogon. They didn't know it, but they had been near each other all the while. Ogon had had a similar experience. It was amazing what they saw, and I think that there are little people still in the world today. Some people called them Aniguni Hayat. The story is not very old because it happened in this area. That is all. Yan Sa. And now for a second short story. Yun Wolos and the Little People. There was a man named Yun Wolos. This is Yun Wolos Wogi, was an elderly man. I used to live near him, and I have lived with him. This story that I am going to tell was told to me by Yun Wolohos Wo'i while we were walking in the woods. Where the dam is today, there was a large valley where they did a lot of fishing. A fishing party had gone down in that valley one night to fish, and they decided to sleep there. About midnight, Yun Wulos woke up. A huge rock had rolled down from the top of the hill. He became frightened, arose, and looked in that direction from whence the disturbance had come. Next he heard some talking. As they were passing by along the top of the hill, they were saying, "There are quite a few fishermen sleeping tonight." Yun Wulos could hear their footsteps. After a while he saw a light and he decided that they were carrying a lantern. Right west of where the dam is, at one time were large bluffs. That's where he heard the voices and saw the light. The story that I'm telling took place a long time ago. It happened when Yun Wulos was a young man.